About a decade or so ago, we started hearing rumblings about a term called new media. It promised change and the power of who tells what stories. While we may have imagined what that would mean, maybe those from affected communities being platformed and promoted, talking about police reform, prison, abolition, women's reproductive rights, protecting the mental and physical safety of black and brown and other minority boys and girls. As we look at the mid 2020s and the industry is a hundreds of $1 million machine, it's being gatekept by white faces like the Full Send podcast and Jake Paul, each glazing Donald Trump in different interviews. And it might have been Logan Paul. I don't know. They're the same person to me.
Investigate you and keep investigating, because if I was doing badly in the polls, number one, you'd be able to put me on, but nobody would care, maybe. But you wouldn't be canceled. But if I was doing badly in the polls, there would be no investigations. There'd be no problems, because it's so sad to see what's happening. So bad. But it's a shame, because it never would have happened. And it didn't happen during my 4 years. It didn't happen. It wouldn't have happened. I got along very well with Putin. I got along with Zelensky. But it wouldn't have happened. And October 7th would have never happened. And inflation would have never happened. And the withdrawal, the kind of withdrawal, we were getting out of Afghanistan with dignity and strength. But to get out the way, I think it was the most embarrassing day in the history of our country.
Also, everyone from four-time world champion Draymond Green to, damn, here, your brother can have a job on the team, Giannis Antetokounmpo, brother of Giannis, the Greek freak. They're all talking sports. Also, possibly CTE-ridden Joe Rogan spouting any conspiracy that he reads on the dark web. How did the changing of the guard just become a modern gatekeeping, but with mostly white men in jeans and tracksuits instead of $3,000 custom-made wool suits? When you actually step outside of your perfectly curated social media bubble, does anything about new media actually feel better? Does any of it actually matter? You know, Bob Biddy has enough billion-dollar backings in Atlanta that it's eventually going to get built. And not only that, I just had to replace the C's with B's like I'm YG just to avoid this video from getting flagged. Those protesting in person have been hit with RICOs. We can't even talk about that one thing going on in the Middle East without fear of this video being flagged. The world watched a man die in the summer of 2020 on TV. We had protests across the globe. Yet, as a black man, I don't feel any safer in the presence of pigs. Pigs still have qualified immunity. Trans or queer folks, as much rainbow capitalism as we've seen, I'm sure you feel more unsafe than you did 10 years ago before all of that. We've had the Me Too movement, and multiple rich men have faced slight consequences, but women watching this, how many of you actually feel like you'll be treated fairly if you speak up, or do you fear getting labeled the reputation of the office bitch and denied the promotion you deserve? Anti-DEI and affirmative action laws, anti-trans bills, repeal Roe versus Wade. States are making it legal for high school age kids to work in meat factories. But hey, a TikToker said don't eat McDonald's because they funding some new bad thing. Also, like 4 private equity companies own parts of every single company you've ever heard of, and they're all funding some horrible thing. How is it that me, some random guy on YouTube that never went to college, can have all of this information yet feel more powerless to do anything the more I learn? And maybe this was the plan of the media companies all along. Well, I'm John Lewis, and this is New Media and the Death of Journalism.
Now that is not what I've read before, but also it's like, even when we're reading these things, it's like, what are we getting this from?
Who would have thought that The Daily Show and The Five, it's like Reese's peanut butter cups, you know, peanut butter and chocolate. Maybe we could all get together here and have quite a mashup.
Yeah, I think of it more as like a taco.
Which reads, in part, all names must resemble real names, no obviously fake names, and I know I don't have to say this, but also never put anything in writing. Which is an incredible thing to put in writing.
No, I was more, and I'll tell you why though, Bill. I think these things are awful because if people knew that they were entertainment, okay, that's fine. But it's presented as the story of the NBA betting scandal. And the problem is the public isn't told. It's actually Donaghy's version of the NBA betting scandal.
They got rid of the labor reporter. They got rid of the courts reporter. They got rid of the poverty reporter. You know, these are three big things that people in Baltimore care about.
So that's why, you know, we're still enticed by the negativity. Because we're always looking for it and everything. And then another, to your point about gatekeepers, I'm of two minds about that, because there is this, I really do want people to learn media literacy. I really do want people to learn how to scrutinize and interpret things a little more delicately. But there is also, like, there's an intellectual world of, like, people using academic speak and therapy speak and all these, like, big words to describe things that make other people feel shut out. And that leads to, you know, people taking in, I don't want to say simpler, but easier to digest ideas that might not have been created with the same amount of care.
Now, if I wanted, I could do the traditional video essay thing and go all the way back to World War I or the Cold War or the Iraq War and talk about Americans losing trust in the media. But truth is, since Americans being a capitalist superpower, each generation has hit the point where they realize traditional media is going to spin things how they want just to keep the status quo. The Red Scare, civil rights activists being painted as commies, the lie of trickle-down economics, it was all pushed on the American people by the media. So let's jump straight into the real thing. By the way, I'm John Lewis, and this video is brought to you by my Patreon subscribers. If you'd like to sign up after watching this, go ahead. Now, the concept of new media is a bit nuanced anyway. First off, we've always had new media. For something to be old, it first had to be new. Also, I'm not going to do the YouTube NPR wisecrack thing and spend 10 minutes talking about the history of newspaper, radio, and cable news. In the words of Kendrick Lamar, the audience not dumb. If you're a returning viewer to this channel, I probably know why. I read the comments to these videos. Now, I'm not the only straight black guy making video essays on this website, and I hardly have the biggest views each month. But a lot of you enjoy the way I make content without speaking over you or being all preachy. So some of my views in this may surprise you. I somehow stumbled into this lane. And even with that being so, I'm not the person you're going to see popping up as a cameo in all the big video essays channels every month. I'm outspoken on things I've experienced in real life. Fandoms I've actually been a part of, not when it's time to make a think piece video and hopefully hit the trending wars or the trending topic of the algorithm with gender war stuff. But with all of that being said, my modest views being more than most channels get, I'm gonna keep it a stack with you, family. All this shit was better when we had gatekeepers and hurdles to jump, at least when it comes to media. I know it sounds pretentious, yes I understand, but when we talking journalism, in real journalism, not just like opinions on the new movies, the standards need to be higher and it needs to be real consequences. Perfect example, every few days some horrific crime is committed, the person is arrested, and the tweet or Instagram post will say something like, Dennis Hobson Seussberg arrested for alleged animal cruelty for forcing his dogs to learn the Tamiya line dance in swirling Texas summer heat. And like clockwork, comments will be like, what the hell do they mean, alleged? We seen the ring camera footage. He knew those German Shepherds couldn't hit the 4-count step and spin. He abused those dogs in that heat. Well, journalists know in America, everyone is innocent until proven guilty. Surely hindsight is 20/20, but how many of you are 100% positive you would have believed those young men in the 1990 known as the Central Park Five after all the alleged proof, full-page ads calling for the death penalty, and even convictions? In the year 2024, majority of jobs, I believe, you can be taught on a job after getting the basics and training. But some, I think, yeah, you should spend a few years in school. Doctor, airplane pilot, lawyer, and journalist, just to name a few. But I've never watched Grey's Anatomy. I don't drink enough to be an airplane pilot.
I'm drunk now.
And the last person that stepped to the lawyer legal eagle YouTube career collapsed like wet cardboard. So let's talk about the death of journalism. Chapter 1, a slow death. Now, I'm old enough to remember when the internet was so young, the idea of getting real news from the internet was looked at the same as telling a Magic the Gathering player you play Pokemon, a trading card game. I think that's a good metaphor. I don't know. I only played the video games. Yes, I'm Pokemon Red years old. Of course, Charmander was my starter. So when I was in middle school and then high school, I still had some classes that had us bring in newspaper once a week. It was called media arts or some shit. I don't remember. This was the late aughts, at least when I was in high school. We still used cassette tapes to record fake ad reads for class projects. My inner city, east side of Detroit high school was that broke. Pay the teachers, nuke the whales.
Nuke the whales? You don't really believe that, do you?
I don't know. Gotta nuke something.
Not only that, in my high school computer lab, we had signs that said, Wikipedia is not an accurate source. Yes, bitch, we had the internet and Wikipedia when I was in high school. Don't play with me. And also, I'm willing to bet your little 20-year-old ass still can't do more burpees than me, so I'm young at heart. So to say traditional media was looked down on the internet is an understatement. And it's this arrogance that led to its major decline. Signs have been there as early as the mid-1980s when newspaper sales started to fall faster than your cousin after 4 shots of tequila trying to do a TikTok dance he just learned. But see, they had an answer for the magazines like USA Today. Those started popping up. Technically a newspaper, but not as stuffy and elitist to the average person. Smaller articles, pictures, all that jazz. To the gatekeepers, this magazine was looked down upon, but Americans were still reading. They had editors, even if the content wasn't as highbrow as the local city's newspaper. And that's papers with an S. But not with, not a Seattle Mariners S, because I don't want you LA niggas running up on me if I'm ever in the city. R.I.P. Nipsey Hussle. In a way, US Today was considered new media, even if it was looked down upon. Speaking of looking down, decades earlier when specialty mags like Time and Fortune were all the rage with people who I assumed owned Sunday driving cars, poodles, and monocles, a little magazine by the way of Sports Illustrated came around. What? A magazine's on sports? That's nonsense. What's next? Negroes and whites going to school and eating dinner together? I assume at least one guy yelled because it was 1954 and yes, boxing and baseball were all America's biggest sports, but reading about sports ball or hunting isn't worth the paper it's written on, or so they thought. See, sports magazines were new media at the time. For way more detail on USA Today's history, cable news, and Sports Illustrated full history, check out my cousins who don't know they my cousins, Lexual Media with her series Lex Does the 90s and FLEMLO Raps. I'll link the videos below.
Great move was to hire Andre Laguerre as the magazine's managing editor. The French native had an appreciation for really good writing. He brought a certain standard to the magazine that would set it apart. He also better aligned SI with both potential readers and potential sponsors, which is obviously important. He did that by dialing back all the golf, tennis, and fishing stories and hyper-focusing Sports Illustrated on basketball, baseball, football, hockey, traditionally known as the Big Four American sports.
You see, not only do the gatekeepers hate anything that makes access to the common folk because it takes away that elite feeling. As long as old people and young people have existed, old people have hated anything new. If you go back far enough, it was a pushback against books. Yes, books, nigga, because oral tradition and scrolls were the norm. But people love information and also being told what to be afraid of. That's why in 1980, when CNN was launched as the first 24-hour news network, it could be seen as one of the first nails in the coffin of old media. The phrase, if it bleeds, it leads, might as well have been the slogan of the 80s. AIDS, crack cocaine, and serial killers helped popularize fast food news. A term I think I just made up. You will watch a story, forget about it the next day, replaced with another story like the Satanic Panic or some school in the South that dared have a prom with black and white kids dancing together because seriously, it's fucking America. You thought people just stopped being racist after Brown versus Board? But really, go watch Lex Does the 90 after this. She does a deep dive into that. A lot of southern schools had segregated proms well into the 90s.
In 1990, it was reported that 11 counties in Georgia alone had segregated proms, and many also held segregated class reunions. Take Peach County High School, whose school board stopped throwing proms when schools integrated in 1970. It was newsworthy when the school decided to hold its first integrated prom 20 years later.
While all of these changes could somewhat be chalked up to, I don't know, petty grievances and fear of change, the big C word is what really killed off journalism in America. Yeah, capitalism. Newspapers wanted to save money. Check out this Michael Moore clip from 2009 where he talks about how Republicans have been trying to dismantle the public education system for decades. Keep in mind that with newspaper laying off beat writers that cover things like labor, poverty, and crime, they slowly been creating an American population that's not as informed, as educated, or even interested in the local news and government.
We have wrecked it beyond belief, and the policies of Republican presidents who have dominated the political scene for the last 30 years, I mean, they have a party platform position every convention to dismantle and eliminate the Department of Education. They want as little money spent as possible on education, and if there's one union they'd like to bust, it's the teachers union.
So it's one more edit. Yes, this is a Fly Emirates kit. No, I don't watch soccer. I don't know what city Fly Emirates plays in. I can't even name a single player on that team. But it's black and navy blue and had the snakeskin print. I had to grab this when I seen it out. You know how black people do. It's swag. We just buy stuff for the aesthetic sometimes. If you see us with a baseball hat or a hard hockey hat, we don't know about that team. It's just how we do. But anyway, in editing this, some of the best news of the years came out, and I figured I had to jump back in to edit since it made sense. Skip Bayless of the Fox show, Undefeated, has been fired. Now, I dislike this man so much. Certain people, my brain just kind of blanked out when I was writing the script. So we're going to smoke in that Skip Bayless pack for a minute and a couple more guys in this section. And I didn't have time to write a script for this. But yeah, so Skip Bayless was fired. Him and Stephen A. Smith are pretty much the reason sports debate in cable television is as bad. They both did have a journalism background. Skip Bayless, I believe, he actually had a way deeper bag in journalism. He started off on Cold Peaks on ESPN back in the day. He brought in Stephen A. Smith when Stephen A. Smith was brought back to ESPN, and they started First Take, and boom, it caught like wildfire. But this was also in the era where we didn't have as much competition. And First Take, along with Undisputed, I'll use them interchangeably because I don't have a script for this part. I'll probably get them mixed up. But they were kind of like when you were a kid and you just liked Michael Bay movies. You just thought it was the coolest thing. Then you get older and you're like, this is just kind of dumb. So Skip Bayless, he leaves. Stephen A. Smith gets way too big, so he leaves ESPN. Skip goes to Fox on Undisputed, and he brings over Shannon Sharpe. And it was 8 years that he was at Fox, and the show was also a success. This is where the format of people that follow sports is kind of a known secret that they try and get the format of black guy and white guy argue, and that's pretty much all it was. The thing people hate Skip Bayless for, they probably hate Skip Bayless more than they hate Stephen A. Smith, because before this last year or so, when Stephen A. Smith just became a full caricature of himself, he was a little bit funny. You know, the trolling the Cowboys fan stuff, he had his antics. But Skip Bayless was like, first off, at the time, right now, he's a 72-year-old man. He's just a short, tiny, angry, old white man. And I've never been so happy to see someone fired. Like, I hate the way he walks, the way he talks, the way he wears Jordans, whack. The way he wears suits, whack. The way he talks into the microphone, whack. The way he wakes up and brushes his teeth is whack. I just hate everything about him. So I'm glad that he's gone. And the next person I want to see get fired is Emmanuel Chu, because Fox Sports has a couple good shows. Like Nick Wright, I can kind of watch clips of it, but Nick also does that thing where you can tell that he's having to make content for Fox News or cable news instead of just being himself. On his podcast with his stepson, he doesn't behave like that. But anyway, I want Daniel Chu out of the game soon too, because Joy Taylor, she's really good, but it's impossible for me to support her show because of people like Emmanuel Chu. And when it comes down to it, Skip Bayless and Stephen A. Smith, they've affected sports talk and sports news just so bad that it's unwatchable. So at the end of this edit, I'm going to put in some of the channels. A lot of their names are blanking because I'm doing this like live, but it's a lot of good guys and making amazing content. Pretty much all of them I go to for my basketball or sports takes. But since I did do this part, I just wanted to add a couple guys. We'll call this little section, I guess, the angry white guy. Another person I really can't stand is Dave Portnoy. He's like whatever your mind imagines about angry, racist white guy from Boston who claims he can't be racist because he has black friends or black employees is Dave Portnoy of Barstool Sports. So you know, it was that thing going online a couple weeks ago saying that, well, you know, black men, they hate Angel Reese and they want Caitlin Clark to be MVP or whatever they were saying, which wasn't true. It was a couple people like Stephen A. Smith giving her all the attention. A majority of the hate was coming from Barstool Sports. They have multiple accounts. I believe they have like a Twitter account for pretty much every major team, but the main guy who owns it is Dave Portnoy. And the way he's been behaving on Twitter towards Angel Reese, it's complete nonsense. I don't know how his black employees continue to associate with him. Like, after those contracts are up, how do you continue working for a guy like that? Barstool Sports gave just recently, about a year and a half ago, $1 million worth of game. They're like, they're owned by Barstool Sports in a way, or they got the bag. I don't know exactly how the contract is, but they're definitely in business. Later at the end of this video, I say something like all of these big companies are basically buying all of these sports podcasts. It's happening with auto YouTube channels also, like automotive YouTube channels. And this is the stuff I mean. So we got guys like Dave Portnoy, who clearly just hates black people. Like, he has this weird obsession with LeBron James that if you know about sports, you know, because it really doesn't get covered by ESPN and stuff, because why would they talk about Dave Portnoy, one of their competitors? But he has this obsession with LeBron James where he's thinking about LeBron. No, it's Kyrie. Well, he talks about LeBron a lot too, but he's still angry about Kyrie Irving's when Kyrie played for the Celtics, because Dave is a Celtics guy. And it's just all nasty. And the last thing I wanted to talk about in this section that I might as well add, that I didn't really plan on add when it comes to journalism, is this new wave of conservative comedy. I kind of talked about it in my last video, but it's just so weird that they're so bad at comedy. And the newest example is this cartoon called The New Norm, which is a Twitter cartoon. This is how bad it is. They have a laugh track. I haven't seen a laugh track in a cartoon since the first season of the Flintstones. But it's not just a New Norm, it's Mr. Bertram. And these shows, it's like they're trying to be King of the Hill, but they don't understand that Hank Hill was a likable person, that the network hired good writers. The network didn't just want to dunk on Democrats and liberals, but Hank actually had a reason for believing his views of 1990s America, you know what I'm saying, being a Republican. It's so weird that we're getting to a state where instead of people were like, you know, I can package my message like this, it's just straight up hate. And especially when you're a person like Dave Portnoy, who did build his company from the ground up to talk sports, it's, at least to me and all of the black sports fans I follow, we kind of look at Barstool Sports as, oh, that's basically right-wing sports. They aren't as overtly racist as some of the right-wing political channels, but if Candace Owens or something somehow got a show or started working on Barstool Sports, I don't think it would surprise anybody. But yeah, I just wanted to add this in. I'm glad Skip Bayless is fired. Oh, and also, ESPN tweeted out like a day, like an hour after it came out. They're like, yeah, we're not interested in Skip Bayless returning to ESPN. Chapter 2, the edutainment era. It's no secret that we living in a time where adults' attention span is getting shorter and shorter. Is why I don't have a TikTok and can only watch Instagram reels that are derpy animals or cars racing. Everything else makes me feel like I'm going to have a seizure. And it copies the intro of the movie Belly. Seriously, what the fuck was Hype Williams smoking? That sounds like a joke, but I won't even put a clip of the Belly intro because it actually gives me a headache. And I'm sure epileptics might actually pass out. So it makes sense that educational journalists that don't want the same fate as old media like magazines and newspapers would adapt. Look at crack.com, whose decline began 10 years ago. It's because of that website I'm literally like 1 degree of separation from Cody Johnson of Some More News, but we'll get back to that in a few minutes. But adaptation is the name of the game. It happens in business, entertainment, and even sports. Peep this. You know Jesse Owens, one of the most famous American Olympians, of rapper Young Dolph. I'm not one for holding up tradition just for the sake of tradition. Some people think men shouldn't have long hair. If you can adapt and still accomplish the end goal with integrity, Go ahead. Now, I've joked in many videos about NPR or National Public Radio being whiter than a minor league hockey game in Canada. Shut the hell up. Yes, I know that was 2 sports jokes back to back. I'm sorry, I don't have time to work a full-time job, run a YouTube channel, and play enough video games to watch anime to give you other references. I gotta talk about what I know. While NPR is some liberal hipster shit, they do make good content sometimes and do amazing journalism. One of the first podcast series I ever listened to was Serial Season 1.
Syed now breaking his silence as he faces the possibility of returning to prison.
Our family, we've suffered so much, you know, just over the past 20, almost 24 years. And it's really hard for us. It's hard for my dad. It's hard for my mom. It's hard for my younger brother.
After spending more than 23 years behind bars.
About this guy, Adnan Syed, who it really sounds like got convicted for murder because, well, you know, America, he's Muslim, and it was the late 1990s. This series balances giving us nuanced facts, court documents done by someone who's trained in fact-checking and journalism. As opposed to most true crime podcasts that are just Reddit theory recaps, the series actually led to lawyers opening the case, and spoiler alert, Syed was released from prison after enough support from the public.
Okay, John, but that podcast, it's not funny. Where's the jokes, man? I need jokes. I can't learn without jokes.
Alright, well, I understand, but also maybe kind of wean yourself off the frozen espresso lattes. You sound a little bit hyped up, champ. But the show that, in my opinion, single-handedly changed the direction of what modern journalism in America looks like is the Jon Stewart era of The Daily Show. During the 2000 W. Junior election.
As your slogan says, Fox News. We read the chain mails your grandma gets in her inbox out loud like they were true.
There is no question that Mr. Stewart is going to hell.
Your hell doesn't scare me. I make my living watching Fox News 8 hours a day. I'm already in hell.
Our commander-in-chief displayed his complete disrespect for the men and women in uniform.
Shut up. What appeared to me to be another example of a Fox News segment expressing anger and victimization over the loss of absolute power and reframing that as persecution of real America by minorities, freeloaders, and socialists. That's trademarked, by the way.
It's the equivalent of Eric B. and Rakim Payne the Fool album that everything before it seems ancient, and a couple years after people who hadn't adapted, it's like, hey, you guys still doing that corny flow? Indecision 2000 was so impactful. As a 10-year-old, I had no idea what he was really talking about half the time, but I was really interested as my brother, who had control of the TV, would watch it some nights. As I got older, I'll become a semi-regular viewer. I was still a teenager, of course. Then into my 20s, I realized, wow, this show is low-key like The Simpsons, except a quick jab. They could do 12 rounds performing the sweet science talking about political PACs and corporate lobbying. Now, I'm sure it's some fair criticism for Jon Stewart. No one's perfect. But he introduced millions of young people to a way of discussing news and serious topics in a way that could keep our interest. Side note, because this chapter of the video is wider than the Harvard cafeteria, I have to get this out the way. Comedy Central 100% should have given Roy Woods Jr. the gig after Trevor Noah. He was the perfect fit. But back to Jon Stewart. I'm sure if you dig deep enough, you can make a video about why we should hate him, like leftists do with anything that brings people enjoyment. At one time, he was considered the most trustworthy journalist in America by a research poll. That, and not long ago, Apple canceled or John quit his show, The Problem with Jon Stewart.
Staff members say Stewart told them last night he and Apple executives agreed to pull the plug. The former Daily Show host had creative control over the show, but again, according to staff members, Stewart told them the company had concerns about the subject matter for the upcoming season. The planned topics included China, Israel, and AI.
Somebody on my channel straight up told me that they don't trust big budget media anymore, that they needed to be low budget like I do in order for them to trust it, because if the production quality is too high, if there's too much money involved, they start to become, and that I was like, damn, that kind of makes sense. And I remember that Jon Stewart story. Yeah, I watched that like maybe a week ago where he's just talking about why he left Apple, and I forget exactly what the elements of the story were, but he was like, that story went over gangbusters with the audience. That just, that's one of the biggest reactions I've ever gotten from the audience. And that was also a big point of contention because it's like, all right, people wanted to hear this, people needed to know this, and people feel empowered knowing this now, and you won't let it happen because of what your money is tied up in. And yeah, man, I don't even know. Things are falling apart, man. We are not in a good place information wise.
Because as an actual journalist with integrity, he wanted to do a no holds bar episode on China and AI. That's artificial intelligence, not God damn it, I did it again. I'm sorry. You know what? Someone make a John Lewis bingo board. Just make the free space a sports reference. But see, that's the issue with modern journalism. No matter how good you are, how ethical, unless you're willing to go truly independent with your own website and hope viewers can fund the show, all it takes is the company you work for to say, are you out of your fucking mind? In this case, Apple does a lot of business with China for its phone production. And like every other remotely tech company is shoving AI down our throats like Joey Chestnut at a hot dog eating contest. Shut the hell up, that one doesn't count. That is not a sport. So when even a major name like Jon Stewart can be silenced, and not for saying racist, homophobic shit the right wingers want to talk about, it brings up a lot of questions about actual free speech and the part capitalism plays in journalism integrity and American media. But speaking of Daily Show, one of John's understudies on the series was John Oliver. Before getting his own series on HBO last week tonight, see, if Jon Stewart was Jay-Z, John Oliver would be like J. Cole. They both went on to have amazing solo careers after leaving The Mentor.
Here we see Formosians living in freedom. Well, not freedom per se, but the point is they're not commies, and that's where my curiosity terminates. How do we all seek happiness right now that isn't, at its root, fraudulent? Oh, God, that was a truly depressing from the audience. Look, I know that sounds dramatic, but Sarah Palin's fourth attempt at cloning herself actually has a point there. So it's not good, but it's not as bad as it looks, which is never a satisfying thing to hear, or indeed read above the buffet at a Golden Corral. But here's the thing, this country did a truly amazing thing. Richard Nixon did a truly... Really?
Again, at least one of my white liberal friends doesn't rock with Oliver because of one episode he made some gaffle. I don't know. But here's the thing about being black in America. We can't as easily write off white allies who seem to be on the right side of history. I'm never going to agree with 100% of what anyone says about anything. But it's well known to a lot of people the power a straight white man has by saying something other groups have said for years. It'll just hit harder and spread faster. So if it takes John Oliver making an episode on bail reform or opioids to get some real progress, so be it. But this is the edutainment section. Not only are these guys making really good shows with well-researched stories, fact-checked by a team of writers, but also lawyers, because yeah, some of the stuff they talk about is not a joke. It's done really well and funny, and I mean actually funny, not in a white people pale as chalk way every black leftist writes for a symphony laugh in their video.
That's the joke.
I know we all hate Warner Bros., HBO's parent company, because they canceled completed movies, and we can only hope that the Looney Tunes movie gets leaked one day. But life ain't black and white, family. Last Week Tonight has helped me a ton in my own research for this channel and encouraged me to dig deeper about topics and find new angles, stories, and check out other books. So remember I said I was like 1 or 2 degrees separation from Some More News? Well, that's not the whole truth. I'm actually like 2 degrees separation from Some More News and Last Week Tonight. See, one of the main writers on Some More News is Daniel O'Brien. He used to work for now basically dead comedy website crack.com along with Cody Johnson, host of Some More News. As some of you may know or may not know, I regularly guest appear on the white homie Adam Todd Brown podcast network. You Don't Even Like This Show, formerly called Unpopular Opinion. Adam was a main editor and had his own weekly column writing at crack.com. I connected with him on Twitter almost a decade ago. I got like 3 or 4 articles published on the website back in the day. They were freelance articles before y'all flipped the story to say I said I worked for crack full time. That's nonsense. They didn't have any full-time black people working there. And that connection to Cracked and Dust Adams podcast, then Last Week Tonight and Some More News have all greatly influenced my writing style and sense of humor. And a side note, doing a podcast with comedians and comedy writers who also talk about these topics is so much more fun than doing a podcast with other video essays. No shade, but it's just true. I don't know, maybe that is shade. I don't care. And while I'm honestly not that big of a fan of Some More News, it's a little too try-hard and sometimes cringe for me, I have to respect the amount of research those guys put in for very important topics, weird-ass puppet aside.
It only had 2 doors, and Wombo was mistaken. But 3 doors can't exist on cars. It's possible, so that AI art is actually very accurate and good. Wombo has also been making AI...
In the same way I recognize my inherent advantage of being a masculine, straight, dark-skinned man means some people are going to listen to me and keep coming back to my channel in a way they won't with a queer creator like maybe Herbie Revelis, or some level of misogyny will keep some audience from viewing intellectual media content, even though she does way more research than me. The power of quirky liberal white guys is going to spread to some audiences I'll never be able to tap in with. And if it takes wacky puppets and cringe jokes to get people to look at America's housing crisis and DEI dog whistles, so be it. At the end of the day, we're all doing our best at journalism, getting stories and news out. Chapter 3, Celebrity Worship, and the sports pros had it right all along? So, quick edit to this chapter. I had a few thoughts while in the shower and wrote an extra few paragraphs. Ego and attention is a weird thing. For as much as celebrities and athletes claim they miss their privacy, I can't tell. Here's a list of active or retired athletes with podcasts. Pat McAfee, David Ortiz, Matt Barnes and Steven Jackson, Draymond Green, Giannis' little brother, JJ Redick, and LeBron, before they made the Lakers hire him as head coach, Vince Carter, Gilbert Arenas, Arenas Williams, CJ McCollum, and finally, Shannon Sharp. Some of those people I've never heard of, most of those podcasts I've never listened to. And most of those men don't need the money. Besides Pat McAfee, because he was a kicker, they don't really make that much money compared to other NFL players. But besides being athletes, what is the draw? Draymond Green had this run a couple years ago where he's like, athletes are taking over new media. We're going to flip the sports landscape on his head. Then you fast forward 2 years later, unlike actual journalists, he takes months-long breaks whenever he feels like it. And this podcast space of athletes has just become an excuse for a bunch of grown men to gossip and talk about the old days with their friends and interview each other. See, the thing about journalism and, in a way, video essays, I feel like we an offspring of that genre.
This relationship used to be symbiotic, that people in the media needed the access to the teams and to the athletes, obviously, to do their jobs, and the people on the teams and the athletes or whatever needed the relationships with the media to get out whatever information they wanted for branding, increase your fame, visibility, all of this stuff. It used to go back and forth. Well, one, you kind of started and got a level of media that didn't require access. And I say that with no judgment because I have made a lot of money in that world, right? Like, I don't need to talk. You can talk to me if you want to, but I'm going to talk about you regardless. But that dynamic and people who don't treat that with enough care, they then create a situation that leads to a lot of distrust that athletes have toward the media.
Not everyone does this with some type of bias. It's very clear when someone with an agenda or wanting to hate something or something. But a good video essays and a good journalist goes in neutral and present the facts they find. Take, for example, that video I made on the Freakonomics guys. It started off as supposed to be a quick video I can knock out in a week. Then the more I read and researched, I found out the entire academia field he was involved with has this layer of racism and just exploiting people for research. So when it comes to athletes especially, most of these people have been the best player on their team since like 8 years old. Everyone is bent the knee when they make it to the pros, and reporters and journalists dare ask them questions and to expound. So in response, because everyone has a voice, they interview each other because only other athletes should get my respect. Who are these journalists and reporters to push on a question that they ask me? But as someone who's watched some of these shows, I won't say which ones, because like YouTubers, niggas have egos and sensitive, and I might run into them. But a lot of them suck because they're poor interviewers who also want to protect their peers. It's really hard to describe just how difficult it is to make an interesting interview for viewers who aren't super fans. Sure, if you're a huge LeBron James fan, you're going to sit back and watch the interview, rather it's David Letterman talking to him, or if it's some retired running back asking him about the decision to go play for Miami for the 100th time. That's easy. But that 90% of audience who don't give a shit about basketball or sports or LeBron James aren't going to watch that entire interview. Take Cardi B, for example. I'm about as neutral as you can be on Cardi B. I mean, she makes okay music, but I'm not running to play her new record. Also, I'm not skipping it if it comes on in the shuffle like I would with that self-hating Doja Cat. But when she appeared on David Letterman's My Next Guest Needs No Intro, I grabbed the wife, poured up a drink, and we watched it the same day it dropped. Because I know David has the tact to get this young woman to open up about her past, present, and future in a way very few can.
But this is not an easy job. Like, Sean, I can imagine how many people you've worked with, athletes, non-athletes, and you see them realize, yo, this is really hard.
Yeah, I think people forget that it's like a job that people, like, you've worked years in radio, you've written, you know how to, make thoughts sound really good, and people really think that you could just turn on a mic and be yourself and that's enough.
But the thing is, a lot of people who think that are also the people that write the checks on this, right? And so everything is so saturated right now that I don't know how anything breaks through. I've made this point. Like, we're doing this podcast here. I've been doing this now for 6 years. Like, we're going into the 7th year of it. I don't know how anything breaks through, but the model seems to be for a lot of people, and what they're just trying to do is, like, we're going to find a ball player, we're going to find a homeboy, and we're going to get out here and we're going to talk. And I'm asking the question because I can only hear so much of it. A, how much of it is good, and B, who cares?
People did their research. Me getting in Fast and Furious, everybody knows the story of John Singleton going to Ja Rule not being able to do it, and then me trying out. I was actually on tour with Eminem at the time.
You got me off my square. You got me jumping at a Blake Griffin pump fake. And I'm just like, bro, shut up.
Body is coming in, you being told you gotta shoot threes, you're being told you gotta play on the wing, even if you're a 4 or 5.
Denver, Colorado.
Yeah.
Like, as a new face and a fresh rookie with so much potential, you're in Denver.
I wasn't watching that whole ass Cat Williams interview, but people did. What exactly did you learn about Cat Williams? And if you did, how much of it do you actually believe? It's filled with cat accusing men of being homosexuals, Illuminati members, to wild claims of running NFL-level 40-yard dash times.
Watching Cat completely no-sell his corny-ass joke was a thing of beauty.
Oh, you been on the submarine. That what you saw?
So back then, it was even greater.
And the hits keep on coming, because just as I thought I was wrapping this thing up, friend of the channel, FD Signifier, also briefly talked about Shannon Sharpe recently on his B-Sides channel. He had similar thoughts on the matter. He straight up called Shannon Sharpe dumb.
It also somehow elevated Shannon Sharpe to the status of, like, expert interviewer, and this is wrong because Shannon Sharpe is dumb.
And while I absolutely believe there are different types of intelligence, I don't believe the Club Shay Shay podcast is a good vehicle for Shannon Sharpe to display whatever his intelligence is. I don't think Shannon Sharpe knows when he looks dumb or cares about feeling dumb. It's that delicate balance of confidence and self-awareness I mentioned in that video about my college professor.
At the end of the day, is anyone actually watching these interviews for Shannon's skills, or is everyone just laughing at him as he stumbles across false information he got from guys know who where, like thinking Amanda Seales' mother was white? The level of celebrity worship we have online is the only reason these guys have a platform, and even that seems to be falling. Yes, as of right now, Shannon Sharpe gets millions of views interviewing Cat Williams and Meg Thee Stallion, but can he do this for 5 or 10 years? Is he trained to push obvious BS questions or ask questions in a way that aren't offensive or come off as ignorant? There are some athletes who do this very well. Ryan Clark of the Pivot. No disrespect to Fred Taylor or Channing Crowder, but he's clearly the Beyonce of the group. The fellas know it, and I love y'all show. I talk all the time about how people make video essays putting all this BS on black men for this or that, but they not willing to interact or invite on someone like me or others who explain why regular black dudes move like this and believe the things we do. The Pivot has found a way to humanize athletes, especially football players who are our modern day gladiators, and tell their stories. But even with that, the same way Kendrick Lamar can only make so good of a song if the beat is garbage, a great interviewer can only do so well if the guest is not willing to open up. Now again, I'm no expert on the subject or psychology of body language, but if you spent a lot of years going to school in the hood and working and interacting with people who might not have your best interests at hand, you can tell when someone is bullshitting you or just faking it. Like the Rich Paul interview. Long story short, Rich Paul is LeBron James' childhood best friend turned mega sports agent. And I cut his interview with the Pivot off after about 10 minutes. It was the most PR friendly. I had an image to protect. He checked every box. Oh, God wanted this for me. Black excellence, wealth building, yada yada. But that's one, maybe 30 interviews. That's the difference when it comes to a host who can get information out of a guest and make it natural.
You know, maybe have a rule, something that you can take away from each chapter to really, but that encompasses everything in that chapter. So when iron your clothes, as much as it's about actually ironing your clothes, that's actually about building great habits and having consistency and having detail, right?
Nigga, what? So I've been doing this long enough that I understand the audience better than you all know yourselves. Meaning, if I did a poll and said, would you like if I start interviewing other creators in between these longer videos? It'd probably be like 90% yes. And those views will be trash. The type of people that watch video essays and have favorite creators, they want to see the creator. Like, if you like Lil Bill video style, when you click on him, you want most of the video to be him. Same with FD Signifier, etc, etc. Me as a viewer, 9 times out of 10, I hate when I'm watching a video essay and they cut to some other creator talking, because most people don't edit it in a way that it doesn't interrupt the viewing experience. Even for this interview, I interviewed Nick, but I'm dicing those clips up very small and sprinkling them in because I know you all prefer the way I deliver information and you really didn't come to see someone else. Most creators are arrogant to the point they believe as long as their name is attached, you all watch anything, including interviews, and it's not true. Here's an industry secret I probably shouldn't tell you, but if you ever notice a video essayist who doesn't really do guests in their video, and they start dropping like 5 or 6 different people and having a bunch of clips talking, that means the person really needed to drop that video that month, and that's the best way to stretch out an extra 40 minutes into a script. It'll make the sponsors happy. They get paid more for it when they really don't have the time to write out a full essay. Or if someone starts dropping video essays and switches to commentary or trending topics, think pieces, that means they either don't want to or they just don't have the time at writing at least 5,000 words or more, because I'll be honest, it's really easy to pad views out with a bunch of cameos on creators, but the views show it. Most video essays, biggest videos, like 8 out of their 10 biggest views, have no on-camera guests or it's very limited. Now, back to the pre-shower writings. I know my audience and I know the type of people that watch video essays. I know most of you don't give a damn about sports, but trust me, you all enjoy this section. And it will tie into celebrity worship. As a kid growing up, pretty much the only form of entertainment I know for sure my dad enjoyed was sports, documentaries, and James Bond movies. Him and my mom were around when baseball was one of the biggest team sports in America. I vaguely remember watching Barry Sanders play. The Red Wings were so dominant they had black people watching hockey back in the 90s. And one of Tupac's most iconic photos is him wearing a Red Wings jersey, but also, I don't know where the hell he got a Red Wings jersey with no player number. It's Tupac. I don't know what to say. Before I was born, then the year I was born, the Bad Boy Pistons won back-to-back championships. The Fab Five at Michigan changed the swag of college basketball. So I've always been a fan of sports in some way. If my dad wasn't watching sports, he was probably in the basement after a day of dad shit in his recliner, watching Nat Geo or the History Channel. Remember, this was the 90s and maybe early 2000s before network decay, and those channels became the Ancient Aliens and reality show networks.
And what about the food? Does the appearance of stuffing at the first Thanksgiving table suggest a kind of alien technology?
What? This isn't history. Dude, it is called History Channel.
Time to time, I end up sitting with them watching some documentary about warships, cars, or JFK, you know, boomer topics. And that planted my interest in docs and history. So it only makes sense when ESPN launched its 30 for 30 series of documentaries. I was a better fit than a Super Smash Bros. Competitive player entering the musty as hell and wrinkled clothes contest. The thing with this series, yes, it was sports, but it's from different filmmakers, historians, and journalists. They weren't looking to push a narrative. Yes, I'm aware if you're putting together a piece of work, you inherently are pushing a narrative. But these were more so stories and history being told that just so happened to involve sports. The most well-known one, simply called Broke.
It was really bad. There's a ton of people who've gone broke. Most of them didn't want to do the documentary. Like, why would you? You know what I mean? Hey, you want to talk about how you completely fucking blew it? No, I don't. I don't. And I resent the fact that at the end of your documentary, you're going to be running a list with my name on it. Of you know, that's what they had at the end of it. But
it wasn't just a story about these guys blew money on coke, Hummers, and baby mamas. It explored the mental angst and survivor's guilt of some of these guys feeling the need to give to everyone who had a handout, or what a large sum of money does to a kid who's been poor his entire life and now getting $50,000 a week just for a couple months out of a year. And if you messy as hell, it includes the guy whose house was burnt down by Chili of the R&B group TLC. Nothing about it feels exploitive. You know how you'll watch some YouTube video essay or true crime doc like that sucker Trap Lord Ross, and it's just a way for someone with a black fetish to talk about crime? The 30 for 30 series felt like it had a purpose. They went in to tell a story. No better example is of two of my favorite athletes of all time, Michael Vick and Allen Iverson. These two gentlemen were the culture. They connected with young Gen X and early millennial men like nothing else before. Sure, we had Michael Jordan before them, but Mike never felt like one of us. He partied with Spike Lee only because of Spike's access. Mike didn't speak for black culture or seem interested in being about it. Mike Vick played in Atlanta. Iverson made ball players realize, wait, we can be tatted up and wear jewelry like that? They also each have two of the best documentaries I've seen. Mike Vick's two-part 30 for 30 and Allen Iverson's 2014 Showtime documentary. And sadly, we'll probably never see anything like it again. I'm not going to sit here and spend 30 minutes recapping each just to pad this video out. But it tells the story of different sides of these men's life. The immature young athlete, Vick's post-prison redemption arc, Iverson's limited career because of pride and arrogance, and honestly, a not real commitment to the game. So like most sports fans, in 2020, when it was announced the Chicago Bulls would be getting a 10-part documentary called The Last Dance on ESPN, I was excited. I thought, cool. I was a child during this era. They had access to Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, and of course one of my favorite black elders of all time, Isaiah Thomas of the Detroit Pistons from the west side of Chicago. I don't say this as an exaggeration, but I believe this documentary has single-handedly set back journalism, filmmaking, and done unrepairable damage. See, Michael Jordan is an egomaniac. This wasn't a documentary on the Chicago Bulls in that era of NBA basketball. It was a documentary on Michael Jordan featuring cameos. In order to get this made, Jordan had a lot of oversight in what made it past editing. Scottie Pippen, Jordan's teammate, has come out and said the narrative was edited to make him look like a selfish, bitter man.
I mean, you told me something interesting. I mean, you had family that had stayed with him at one point.
Absolutely. Hey, when Jordan first came to Chicago, first of all, we were fans of his, and to some extent, still fans of his. My family his family, not only did they socialize, hang out, but as I said, you know, I had a little nephew that lived with him. And everybody's still cool, right? Ain't no hate for Jordan.
Mm-hmm.
We just want some realness, right? Just, you know, like I say, you got on national television. And ain't nobody nowhere has ever got on national television and called me an asshole and then publicly said you hate me. I ain't heard that from you. I ain't heard that from you. I ain't heard that from no NBA player. And so and by the way, all them years that you supposedly hated me, you voted for me to be the president of your union.
Yeah, I seen a lot of pictures of All-Star games and y'all.
Isaiah Thomas, the man who led the Pistons to back-to-back championships and kept Jordan out of the finals for the first few years of MJ's career, says he was basically tricked into thinking this would be a real documentary with his side of the story and tell why he was left off the 1992 Olympic team. Instead, the doc alleges that Isaiah Thomas was an asshole and everyone else hated him. But more than that, all of it skates over the facts of more important issues, like Michael Jordan's refusal to speak up on anything seen as political, especially if it affected Black Americans. They spend like 5 minutes, I believe. They mention his Republicans buy sneakers too statement. But for a 10-part documentary, an entire episode should have covered this fact. I mentioned this book many times, and today will be no different. Author Bill Rhoden's book, $40 Million Slaves, has one chapter on Michael Jordan and offers more nuanced looks into Jordan's politics and his life than this entire documentary. Incidents that aren't even hinted at in this propaganda. And that's the big issue. It's not just that this is a 10-hour ego stroking of Jordan. It's influenced the entire genre. We now have docs like Harry and Meghan that's just a reality series with more steps. It has to offer reviews from critics and audience. We've reached a point where studios are willing to give up a sense of unbiasedness if it means getting access to these mega celebrities. Similar to how newspapers got rid of local beat writers for crime and politics, the same thing happened with sports to the point it's all become a PR game for like 3 to 4 of the most popular teams to get coverage. Chapter 4. Screaming A. Smith and Scooby-Doo shit.
Kevin Durant is the greatest player we have ever seen in our lives. I'm gonna call the bosses today. You should be banned from talking basketball. What I'm gonna say to you is a couple of things. Number one, you need to be drug tested immediately. Because I got news for you. When it comes to basketball, baby, sit back and take notes. Let me tell you something. LeBron James is the best player in the world. Do you realize that Kevin Durant is not a shooter? He's a scorer, and he can shoot in a streaky fashion, but he is nowhere near the marksman that LeBron James is. He couldn't hit Broadway if it were empty.
No, this is not a chapter about more sports. It's more about the type of person Stephen A. Smith's success has created. I'm sure some of you don't even know who he is. He's basically the Rob Dyrdek of ESPN, or the Teen Titans Go. No matter the sport, no matter the time, it seems like Stephen A. Smith is on ESPN. I got rid of cable about 3 years ago, and I still really can't escape this man. If I want info on NFL draft, NBA contracts, the big fight, Stephen A. Smith is there, to the point that so many of us actual sports fans, we don't even watch ESPN clips. He actually had a background in real journalism. He was a beat writer during the Allen Iverson era, the 76ers, yada yada, gets a job at ESPN. Fired, rehired, and is now the face of the network. It's not that he annoys me. He seems to just make up sources or facts all the time, and it's being called out numerous times by pro athletes. But because of his success, he's influenced the wild cartoon presenter type, even outside of sports. I can't prove it, but I believe like Joe Rogan is following that blueprint to some extent. It was a time like 7 or 8ish years ago, I would check out random episodes of the Joe Rogan Experience. Before he was MAGA peeled and possibly kicked in the head by a donkey, I don't know. He actually did have people who were experts in different fields and different life experiences for interviews. Before he made his right-wing pivot, if that was all he did, I'd be like, fine, sure, it sucks he platforms biggest, but it's his show. What Joe Rogan does now is pretend to be informed in some level of journalism integrity while just spouting nonsense. Like the time he was tricked into thinking Joe Biden had said some nonsense, so he started calling him a donkey brains, and then 5 minutes later, one of his co-hosts or something had to flip the script and inform him that it was actually a quote from Trump that Biden was repeating.
Days ago, he's talking about the Revolutionary War. He's like, one of the reasons why we lost the Revolutionary War, one of the problems with the Revolutionary War was they didn't have enough airports. Yeah. Have you seen that?
I saw that. Like,
what
the hell?
Like, pull him.
It's
Imagine
crazy.
If you had any other job and you were talking like that,
Yeah.
they would go, hey, you're done.
A few moments later.
The same stable genius that said the biggest problem we had in the Revolutionary War is we didn't have enough airports. Whoa.
Yeah, that's it.
Whoa.
What?
Just for the record.
Is that fake?
It's not fake, but he was referencing Trump saying that. Here's what Trump saying it in 2019.
Oh.
Donald Trump said something about that. And he didn't say Jesus. He said a stable genius, and that's where the transcription.
Let me hear what it says. What did he say?
In June of 1775, the Continental Congress created a unified army out of the revolutionary forces encamped around Boston and New York, and named after the great George Washington, Commander-in-Chief. The Continental Army suffered a bitter winter of Valley Forge, found glory across the waters of the Delaware, and seized victory from Cornwallis of Yorktown. Our army manned the airport. It ran the ramparts. It took over the airports. It did everything it had to do.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So he fucked up.
Yeah, he did. But I feel like
Took over the airport.
you can tell too. It sounds like a little different. He's like, you can tell he like messed up his words, but yeah.
Or the way he just lets Terrence Howard come on and say nonsense about math being fake. Basically, Joe Rogan is a richer version of Shannon Sharp, who it's not much to say that hasn't already been said. I understand some of you will say it's only entertainment. Well, if that's the case, stick to sports or what you actually know. We don't need 2 hours of Cat Williams slandering every black person that's more successful than him while spreading insane conspiracies. Y'all, it's no such thing as halfway crooks. Don't play the part of a host talking about serious subjects and expect people not to critique you. When you gloss over guest triggers, also, not sure if y'all know this, but white people have a reputation of being very nosy. They really do be on some Scooby-Doo-ish. It's countless cases of so-called Reddit detectives cracking the case and turns out it was the wrong person that got accused and doxxed. Ever since Serial premiered, a trend of white folks just deciding to exploit gruesome crimes for views. Yes, it is exploitative. It's many stories of victims saying they've been contacted and harassed after these shows have aired. Either because fans think the family member or the victim is lying or just straight up being stalked for more details and tell us about this, tell us about that. I shouldn't have to say this, but you shouldn't have a favorite serial killer. Because a lot of this content falls into a gray space or it's just speculation and they really can't be sued, we won't see an end to this until that trend just dies off.
It's everywhere, and it's not always honest, and it's not always with the best intentions behind it.
There it is. There's the picture. Everybody knows. People forget. This is a real person's tragedy.
We're getting ready to sue Netflix. You can't do that. It's public record.
Do you fantasize about cracking the case?
Of course. Oh my God, it's in the guy's blood. Holy shit.
We had never experienced anything to this level. It was almost like a hurricane.
And that goes for all these other celebrity-funded podcasts because majority aren't in it for the love of the game. It's because it comes with a check from some big conglomerate that now owns like 70% of podcasts. Yes, private equity is even taking over podcasts. Call me crazy, but I feel like if you have a huge platform, you should have some integrity to give informed takes. I'm not talking about, if the MCU sucks or not, but why were retired athletes giving people medical advice during the 2020 lockdown era? Why does video may seem bleak And you as an audience have probably lost trust in mainstream media and celebrities who is clear can be bought or will just shout what's most likely to get attention and possibly go viral. There are creators putting in real work.
The demands of the Starbucks worker union, their requests are relatively straightforward. They want protection against no-notice terminations, guaranteed hours, and of course, higher base pay starting at $20 per hour for all workers in all states.
And CEOs were making 344 times the typical worker. Congrats, fellas. But also, how the fuck did that happen?
Less spots on TV for Emmanuel Acho, please. Just I can't. No more. Less Emmanuel Acho on my TV.
In San Diego.
And she's talking to producer Alec Opperman about how her patient's insurance denied her request for a wheelchair for a double amputee.
Along with everyone else I mentioned and tagged in this video, pretty much all of us as creators are working independent, relying on sponsors and YouTube's fluctuating ad rates and possibly some support from viewers like you. If you can support a couple of us, or whoever your favorite creator is, it allows us to make the stories that we want to tell without having to be approved by 5 bosses as we try and fight to keep journalism and stories that others won't cover, or in the case of Jon Stewart, could just be wiped away. I'm John Lewis, and I'm out. Gotta remember, I'm looking at this as an album from 2006. Some of y'all younger music fans watching this or listening to it may not really understand where I'm coming from, because now albums, it feels like most albums are just playlists. They just thrown out there to see what can get hits on TikTok, what can get the people dancing. And okay, the algorithm told us, woo, 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 this hot. But you got to remember, when you go look at something, the documentary, which came in 2nd place, I think. I don't know. We'll eventually get to the documentary. That's one of my favorite Rookie albums also. But something like the documentary, when you listen to that, it's similar to Good Kid, Mad City. It feels like you're hearing the life of the game. Or something like 50 Cent, Get Rich or Die Trying, which we'll have to see how well that age, but it kind of all flows together. This album, man, it really doesn't, in my opinion, I'll keep saying it really doesn't feel as focused as it felt to me as a 16-year-old.